I never imagined that a moment of desperation would lead me down a path I'd later struggle to forgive myself for. My name isn't important because this story isn't just about me. It's about how easily trust can be purchased under the disguise of kindness. It began during a time when everything in my life was falling apart. I had just lost my job at a boutique I'd worked at for nearly 3 years. Rent was overdue, and my younger brother's school fees were looming over me like a dark cloud. Our parents had passed away years ago, leaving me as his only guardian. I was always proud of being independent, but reality was making pride feel like a luxury I couldn't afford. That's when I met him. A man of confidence, perhaps in his late 30s. His name was Arman. He carried himself like someone who never had to ask twice for anything. I met him at a cafe I occasionally visited for free Wi-Fi. He noticed me struggling with my laptop and offered to help. He was dressed well, spoke with calm authority, and there was something disarming in his smile. Not forced, but practiced. At first, it was casual. A few shared conversations, mostly about books and life. He never asked too many personal questions, which felt refreshing. He told me he ran a business, something to do with digital marketing, and I didn't pry further. In return, I told him only the basics. Somehow, even with just that, he saw more in me than anyone else had in a long time. Over the next week, he began showing up more frequently. Sometimes he'd offer to pay for my coffee, sometimes he'd just sit and talk, asking how I was coping. He never made me feel ashamed of my situation, which was rare. One day, when I hesitated to accept his help with a grocery bag I could barely afford, he gently said, "Don't mistake compassion for pity." That line stuck with me. Soon after, he offered to lend me some money, nothing major, just enough to cover my brother's school books. "Pay me back when things are better," he said. I told myself it wasn't a transaction. It was support, and that perhaps this was what real kindness looked like. But even then, a whisper inside me asked why someone like him would care so much about someone like me. I ignored that voice. Instead, I started to look forward to seeing him. His presence made me feel safe, understood. In a world that had always demanded something from me, he offered comfort with no conditions. Or so I thought. Back then, I didn't see the line between help and control, between affection and attention bought with currency. I didn't even realize I was trading. But that truth, like all truths, would come to the surface soon enough. Arman's presence became a quiet constant in my life. He never imposed, yet he was always around when I needed someone most. When my brother fell sick and I couldn't afford the prescribed medicine, Arman stepped in without hesitation. He simply transferred the money and said, "Health comes first." Always. I began to see him through a softened lens. The kind of man who noticed the small things, how I always stirred my tea 3 times before drinking it, or how I checked my phone every few minutes out of habit, waiting for a job response that never came. He never asked for anything in return, at least not openly. But slowly, his words began to shift. "You know, most women I help, they usually want more than just money," he said one evening with a casual grin. I laughed, unsure of what he meant. He didn't press the matter, but the comment lingered in the air like perfume, sweet but cloying. Soon, his compliments became more layered. "You're different. You don't act desperate like the others. But sometimes being strong doesn't mean pushing people away. Let me take care of you." His voice was always gentle, yet I could feel something unspoken behind his kindness. It wasn't just care, it was a slow pull, a tightening thread around me. One day, after he'd sent me money to cover my overdue rent, he invited me over to his apartment. He said it was nothing formal, just dinner. "You've been through too much. Let someone treat you for once." I hesitated. The idea made me uneasy, but I also couldn't deny how much I longed to feel wanted, worthy. I told myself it was just a meal. Nothing more. His apartment was beautiful. Polished floors, warm lighting, soft music in the background. He cooked, said it helped him clear his head. We talked for hours. He made me laugh, spoke about life, as if he had all the answers. And for a moment I let myself believe he did. Then came the wine. He poured it like a ritual, assuring me it was to help me relax. I sipped it slowly, watching his eyes as he studied me. There was something in the way he looked at me that felt different that night. Not protective, but possessive. As the evening drew on, his tone changed. He sat closer, brushed a hair from my face, told me I was beautiful, that no one had ever appreciated me like he did. His words were laced with something I couldn't name. Maybe it was desire. Maybe it was control. I didn't protest when he leaned in to kiss me. I didn't move when his hand reached for mine. 1,000 thoughts flooded my mind, but not one made it to my lips. That night I stayed. Not because I wanted to, not because I loved him, but because I didn't know how to say no to someone who had given me everything, except the truth. The morning after felt hollow. I woke up to silence, sunlight bleeding through the curtains, and an empty space beside me. Arman was gone. His absence in that moment echoed louder than any words he could have said. I pulled the blanket tighter around myself, wondering if I had misread everything, or if I'd simply ignored what had always been there. I got dressed quietly, unsure of what to do next. There was no note, no message, not even a call later in the day. For someone who had been so attentive, his sudden distance felt like a slap I hadn't seen coming. I waited. A day passed. Then 2. By the 3rd day, I finally texted him. A simple, "Hey, hope you're okay." He replied hours later with a short, almost mechanical, "All good. Been busy." No follow-up, no warmth. The man who once asked how I was sleeping now couldn't be bothered to ask how I was at all. I tried to convince myself he was genuinely busy. Maybe he needed space. Maybe I was overthinking. But deep down, I knew something had shifted. I could feel it. A week later, I saw a post on social media that made everything fall into place. A mutual acquaintance had tagged him at an engagement party, his engagement party. The caption read, "Wishing Arman and Sana a lifetime of happiness." I stared at the screen, numb. Sana. A woman he'd never mentioned. A life he'd never let me glimpse. And yet, here it was, everything he'd hidden laid out in public smiles and celebrations. It wasn't heartbreak I felt first, it was humiliation. I had believed his concern was real, that his support meant something deeper. But now I saw it clearly. I wasn't special. I was convenient. A temporary escape, a silent agreement dressed in emotional manipulation. The anger didn't come all at once. It built slowly, creeping into every corner of my memory. Every compliment, every gentle gesture, every lie wrapped in kindness. He hadn't just used me. He had made me believe I mattered, only to discard me the moment I gave him the part of myself I'd always protected. I wanted to scream, to confront him, to ask how he could live so easily in 2 worlds. But I didn't, because I already knew the answer. Some people don't care about the damage they cause. They only care about how quietly you disappear after it's done. In the days that followed, I withdrew. I avoided familiar places, ignored texts from friends, and replayed everything in my mind, trying to find the moment I should have walked away. But there was no single moment. Just a slow erosion of my boundaries by a man who knew exactly how to make a broken girl feel seen. And now, all that remained was the weight of regret, and a desperate need to find myself again. For weeks, I carried the shame like a second skin. I avoided mirrors, not because I couldn't bear to see myself, but because I no longer recognized the girl staring back. She looked like someone who had forgotten her own worth, someone who mistook attention for affection and silence for safety. But slowly, something inside me began to shift. It wasn't dramatic. No grand awakening or sudden burst of strength. Just small choices, deliberate ones. I stopped waiting for his name to appear on my screen. I deleted the thread of messages that once made me smile. I returned the earrings he had gifted me, not to him, but to the earth, buried beneath the roots of an old tree where I used to read as a child. And for the first time in months, I allowed myself to cry, not for him, but for me. I realized then that Arman wasn't the beginning of my pain. He was the mirror that showed me the cracks I had ignored for far too long. My struggle for independence had turned into silence, and my need for help had morphed into vulnerability he exploited. But I wasn't broken beyond repair. I began writing again, just a little each day. Not stories, but letters I never planned to send. Words that helped me breathe. Sentences that stitched my sense of self back together. I found a part-time job at a bookstore, humble but honest. It didn't offer much money, but it gave me something far more valuable, dignity. My brother noticed the change too. I smiled more. I talked more. I even laughed sometimes, not because life was easy, but because I was learning how to carry its weight with grace. And as for Arman, he faded. Not instantly, but gradually, like a shadow at dusk. I stopped checking his online updates. I no longer wondered what he was doing or who he was with. He had taken something from me, yes, but I had reclaimed something even greater. My voice. This story isn't a warning. It's a reflection. A reminder that betrayal doesn't always come with raised voices or slammed doors. Sometimes, it comes wrapped in warm gestures and quiet lies. And healing? Healing is not a straight line. It's messy, slow, and often invisible to others. But it happens one choice at a time. Now, when I think of that night, I no longer feel shame. I feel clarity. Because that moment, however painful, taught me what love isn't. And that's a lesson many people go their entire lives without learning. I may have gone to him out of need, but I walked away with something far more enduring. A promise to myself. Never again will I mistake someone else's attention for my own value.